In the book, The Splendid and the Vile, Eric Larson describes the first year that Winston Churchill was Prime Minister of England. Before Churchill came to power, Britain avoided confronting Hitler's Germany. Instead, Britain tried to appease the aggressive nation, and time again, Germany broke its promises and overran territory after territory. Within weeks of coming to power, Churchill stopped this policy of appeasement and convinced the country to fight. This led to the demise of the Third Reich and changed the course of world history. During the single year chronicled by Eric Larson's The Splendid and the Vile, Churchill transformed the British government and all of Britain from a feeble country cowering in the face of German aggression to a buttress of democracy in the old world. In my first genre, I recreated a pivotal speech from Churchill's first months in power. This speech came after Dunkirk, in which 340,000 soldiers were evacuated. However, Churchill didn't dwell on this marvelous feat, because he believed that wars were not won by evacuations. This is only a fraction of the total speech. This part addresses the concerns that Nazis would invade Britain. The reenactment spotlighted Churchill's resolve and his pragmatism. He did not promise the fight would be easy. Instead, he set the direction to the long-term, hard-won victory. In 2 minutes of one speech, he willed all of England to inherit his stubbornness and resolve so they could endure the months ahead. From his perspective, this was the only chance for Britain's survival, and this moment was his best opportunity to communicate it. The future of England rested in this speech, and he was entirely successful. Parliament was swayed by his words, and the British people resolved to continue, regardless of the cost. However, Germany did not back down, and the London Blitz began 3 months later. Britain was in it for the long haul. The constant bombing and the threat of Nazi invasion made Britain desperate for American support. When a U.S. representative arrived in Britain, Churchill was determined to bring him to Britain's side. If Churchill had written a letter to his wife, Clementine, during this time, this genre shows what it may have looked like. The letter shows how Churchill and Clementine were a very well-matched couple. Churchill was constantly portrayed as a cigar-smoking bulldog who was ferocious and stubborn. His single focus at the time of this letter was convincing the United States to help Britain. Clementine countenanced this single-mindedness, but she also perceived there were vulnerabilities that could undermine Britain's ability to survive the war. She defended the country against them. She regularly visited bombshells in the poorer parts of London. The greatest threat to the morale of London was deemed to arise from the tens of thousands of citizens compelled to use public shelters, wherein the conditions were drawing widespread condemnation. And Clementine was resolved to improve the plight of these inhabitants. As a direct result, support for Churchill swelled despite the bleak living conditions. While Britain needed the United States, the country would have lost the war without the resolve of its people. So while Winston Churchill receives credit for saving Britain, one can argue that he would have failed had Clementine Churchill not shored up on his efforts. The two of them worked together to solidify the country's resolve to survive. While this second genre focused on Churchill and Clementine's unique relationship, the final genre represents Churchill and the people's relationship. Through the hardship and terror, the British depended almost singularly on Churchill's strength to get them through the war. As one minister declared, Churchill was the man and the only man we have for this hour. The photographs in the collage each represented an important aspect of British suffering. Churchill's uplifting, though realistic addresses, his visits to bomb sites, and his insistence on overcoming all obstacles in the way of wartime production hardened the resolve of the British. At a time when succumbing to the Nazis was expected by everyone, this drawing illustrated Churchill's strength as he drags an entire country on the road to victory. As this picture illustrates, Churchill did not cower when the raids came. He persevered down the road to victory instead. The British resolve strengthened such that it perplexed the Nazis, whose leaders could not fathom why Churchill had not conceded defeat, given the nightly pounding of London. Throughout the Blitz, against all odds, Britain stood firm, its citizens more emboldened than code, because Churchill managed to teach them the art of being fearless. This lesson, learned in Britain's darkest hour, endures 80 years later in Britain's reputation for keeping calm and carrying on, and represents Churchill's enormous influence on the British society.